At the beginning, Shunpei was thinking that it was a lush green town of roughly 3,000 people, Azuno town. Some students were seen going to school. And then, inside classroom 2-1, someone called out to Shunpei to check something out. Shunpei turned and asked what it was. It was a boy who told him that he had gotten a new pack of Total Arms cards that had been available at the convenience store last night. Shunpei responded in surprise, thinking that the boy had already bought it. A girl nearby commented that the boys still collected those things and reminded them not to bring them to school. Shunpei then said that he wished he could just bike to the convenience store from home. His friend remarked that Shunpei lived past the mountain pass, and Shunpei replied that the Hanatani ward had literally nothing, not even a convenience store, just one of those lonely vending machines. His friend teased him, recalling that Shunpei had even tried to push the vending machine all the way back to his house once. Shunpei thought that out of the 3,000 people living there, the second years in middle school made up only 19 of them. They had been in the same class since preschool, and nothing felt fresh anymore. He then thought to himself that he was so bored. The scene then shifted to the mountains and chickens, and someone said that they were off. A bus was shown next, with Shunpei sitting near the window. He was thinking that among their classmates, there was only one person who stood out. As someone entered the bus, he continued his thought, remembering that at least until elementary school, it had been different. The girl who entered greeted everyone with a "Good morning." It was Anne. She saw Shunpei, turned, and sat in the seat in front of him. As the bus moved, Anne began reading a book while Shunpei stared at her quietly. When the bus arrived at a stand, some students called out to Shunpei, realizing he had fallen asleep. They laughed and said they couldn't believe he had slept on the bus. Shunpei woke up, confused, and greeted them groggily, and glanced at them from the side as the bus started moving again. When they got off the bus, one boy asked if there was an English quiz that day, and another boy suddenly remembered that there was. Shunpei admitted that he hadn't studied at all. From behind them, Anne thanked the driver for the ride as she walked past them. The second boy commented that it felt like they were total strangers now. Shunpei was confused and asked if he meant Anne. The boy confirmed it, saying that Anne had been with them since preschool too. The first friend mentioned that Anne was now attending one of those private middle schools in the city. The second friend added that she took 2 buses to get there. Shunpei found that wild and said he had never even thought about taking those entrance exams. His first friend remarked that Anne was just different from them, acting all high and mighty, looking down on them country kids. Shunpei hesitated and laughed awkwardly, asking if he really thought so. His first friend insisted that it was totally true, saying one could just tell. Shunpei agreed half-heartedly, and then the second friend asked if he had seen the video that had been sent yesterday. The first friend added that Shunpei had watched it too, right? Shunpei, meanwhile, was lost in thought about Anne Takayakawa. He wondered when she had stopped talking to them. Thinking back, he realized that he hadn't even known she was transferring schools until graduation day. The scene shifted again to the bus, where some students were saying goodbye. Shunpei was sitting on the bus again, and Anne was sitting in front of him. He watched her studying and thought that she was always studying. He remembered his friend's words about her acting all high and mighty and looking down on them country kids, but he questioned if she really did. He recalled that Anne had always been the most serious one and always at the top of the class. Shunpei remembered her smile and thought that she had been one of their most reliable classmates. To him, she was still just Anne, the same as ever, but still, he felt there wasn't much to talk about with her anymore. As he looked outside the window, something caught his eye. He suddenly noticed a board where something was missing and grew tense when he realized that the vending machine was gone. Startled, Shunpei shouted that the vending machine was gone. Anne heard him and exclaimed in surprise, asking if it really was. Shunpei looked at her, startled by her sudden reaction, and Anne, who was near the window, confirmed that it truly was gone. They both stared silently at the empty space. As the bus moved forward, Anne stood up and said that it had been there that morning, looking at Shunpei as she spoke. Shunpei, flustered, responded uncertainly, saying that he guessed so. He nervously rubbed his hand while noticing Anne's sad expression. The bus passed the spot, then stopped near a house. As Anne got off, she thanked the bus driver for the ride. Shunpei watched her leave, sighed, and thought to himself, wondering what kind of response that was and realizing that he was terrible at talking. Anne stopped walking, turned around, and watched the bus leaving. Shunpei continued to stare out the window. Both of them thought to themselves that they had talked for the first time in forever. Then the scene shifted, and a television was shown where the anchor was saying good morning and reporting today's weather. Shunpei was seen sleeping while eating, and his mother shouted at him, demanding to know why he was still sitting there since the bus was about to leave. Shunpei reacted in shock, realizing too late that the bus was already leaving. He looked tense and muttered that the bus had already gone. From behind, his mother told him to go ask his grandmother to drive him. Shunpei agreed and, with a tense face, thought that having to wake up earlier just because he lived far from school really sucked. It was a 40-minute trip one way, and the kids who lived near the school were probably still asleep. He grew frustrated and then remembered, and saying, "It was there this morning, right?" Embarrassed, he recalled his awkward response, "Guess so," and thought that just remembering it made him feel weird all over, even though a whole day had already passed. As he went back inside the house, he thought to himself that they were classmates, from the same neighborhood, so what was he even getting shy about? Near the entrance, Shunpei lay down and thought that he couldn't stand the awkward fog in his chest anymore. He decided he needed to reset, but then wondered what reset even meant in this situation. He questioned whether it meant going back to not talking to Anne, like they had for the past 2 years, or if it meant going back to how they used to be and talking like normal friends again. He wondered which one it was supposed to be. Just then, his grandmother shouted, asking if Shunpei was late again. Shunpei panicked and called out to his grandmother in surprise. Later, he was seen getting out of the car near the school. Time passed, and it was soon evening. He was sitting on the bus while his friends were leaving, saying goodbye to him. Shunpei said later, and his friends replied, "Yeah." As the bus started to move again, Shunpei glanced toward Anne, who was sitting nearby and studying. He wondered to himself if he should try talking to her. He immediately hesitated, reasoning that just because they had talked a bit yesterday didn't mean he had to talk to her today. Still, he thought about how they used to talk all the time, and it should be fine to just act normal again. But then he grew uncertain and realized how a little silence for a while could turn into a big gap between them. He thought that maybe that was just how things went. As he looked out the window, Shunpei told himself to stop overthinking. He convinced himself that, and probably didn't even care about him that much anyway. At that moment, Anne suddenly spoke and asked why he hadn't been on the bus that morning. Shunpei was shocked and asked if she was talking to him, and confirmed that she was. Flustered, Shunpei explained that he had just overslept and totally slept through it, trying to sound casual but feeling that his response came out lame as hell, and repeated the word just, prompting Shunpei to continue, saying that being late wasn't good or anything, but it was kind of nice having a slow morning for once, and glanced at him, then stood up, closed her book, and said that she saw. She moved to another seat and added that since he hadn't been there, she had wondered what happened. Shunpei was shocked and asked in disbelief if that was really so. The bus continued moving, and both of them sat quietly, and reading again. When the bus stopped, the driver pressed the stop button, and Anne walked out, thanking him for the ride. Shunpei called out to her awkwardly, starting with and waved his hand while blushing, and turned around, saw him, and as Shunpei quickly looked away, she stopped, waved her hand back with a soft mage-men, and blushed as well. The bus started moving again, and Shunpei, sitting on his seat, thought to himself that he would try not to be late tomorrow. Then the scene shifted, showing a mountain and a breakfast table. Shunpei was yawning while holding a toothbrush. The scene then shifted again, showing the bus, where Shunpei was sitting and thinking that yesterday he had looked up the school and went to Tsudoegaoka Private Middle School. He thought about how he had only ever seen it from the outside and was amazed that it had 3 classes for every grade and so many clubs. He noted that they even had their own cafeteria, meaning there was no school lunch, and thought that it was a totally different world compared to their school. Shunpei thought that Anne was probably doing great at that fancy school, and that he couldn't even begin to imagine what it was like. Looking at it now, he thought that it really felt like Anne was in a completely different world. He kept telling himself that Anne is still Anne, but she just felt so far away from that now. He then remembered the moment when he had waved at Anne and she had waved back, and as the bus arrived at the place where Anne was standing, he thought that maybe that was just what he wanted to believe, and entered the bus and greeted everyone with a good morning. Shunpei saw her, and Anne saw him, and there was an awkward silence. Shunpei thought about what that awkward silence just now had been, and sat in her seat, and as Shunpei looked outside, he saw her reading a book. He then asked how her school was. Anne heard him and glanced at him from the side. Shunpei quickly added that he didn't really know much about her school and was just curious, that's all. Anne quietly replied with an "ah," and went back to reading. Shunpei felt embarrassed and thought that he had totally blown it. They had been chatting a little lately, so he thought he could just talk to her normally again. He wondered why it suddenly felt so hard. He told himself that she was still the same, and wasn't she? Then, Anne got up from her seat, walked toward him, and sat in the seat next to him. Shunpei looked shocked and stammered in surprise. Anne looked at him, and Shunpei nervously asked what was happening. Anne said that since he was the one who had started talking, she came over to talk. Shunpei panicked, saying that she didn't have to change her seat all the way back there, adding that he had thought she was ignoring him too. And looked confused and asked if, in his head, she was someone who would ignore him. Shunpei quickly denied it, stumbling over his words. After a short pause, An said that they used to talk like that all the time, so it was fine. Shunpei looked at her and agreed, saying that she was right. He thought to himself that, honestly, everything Anne talked about was stuff he had already read on her school's website yesterday. What he ended up sharing, on the other hand, were just dumb little things, like how ancient their math teacher was or how the hallway floorboards squeaked like crazy stuff and probably couldn't care less about. Then, after something Shunpei said, and tried to hold back her laughter but ended up laughing, Shunpei continued the story, saying, "And then he said that, can you believe it?" And Anne laughed again, saying, "What a weirdo," with a small chuckle. The bus continued moving, and Anne then returned to her old seat. Shunpei looked out and thought that they were already close to school. He noticed some students and saw, and reading her book again. He blushed slightly. Just then, Shunpei's friends entered the bus. One of them called out loudly, telling Shunpei that he wouldn't believe what had just happened. The other friend interrupted, telling the first not to spill that first thing in the morning. Shunpei told them that they were being too loud. They sat in their seats, and the first friend said in surprise that Shunpei was actually awake today since he usually looked half dead in the mornings. Shunpei fumbled and awkwardly said that he had just woken up a little while ago. His friend replied that it was obvious. Then the scene shifted to the bus stop, where the students were getting off. Shunpei saw Anne leaving and then heard his friend calling for him to hurry up or they would leave him behind. Shunpei responded that he was coming and then looked ahead, thinking that just like that, another ordinary day had begun. As he walked away, and glanced at him from the side, and Shunpei thought to himself that, even though it was just another normal morning, the light, fluttery feeling inside him still remained and he still didn't know what it was.
By the way, if you enjoyed the video, maybe consider liking and subscribing, pretty please?